everyone, today I'm going to show you 3 different product render shots that you could use for your product showcase or for any commercial purpose. I will go over how I created the shots, what the idea was behind them, and of course some tricks that you could use in Blender for yourself, for your own scenes. And with that being said, let's start already with the first shot. The first shot is this one right here. I personally call this the hero shot. I don't know if this is actually called like this, but this is just, you have your main object in the center. It's nicely lit in a Lightroom and it has a small wiggle animation, as you can see. So it's not completely boring, it's not completely stiff. So you just get a good look at the product itself. And you should always have one shot that looks exactly like this and have maybe a small movement, a small wiggle, a small bounce in it. Just what matches for your object, so it's not too boring to look at. Now, how did I set this up? Normally for a simple Lightroom, I just take a plane, scale it up. In edit mode, I will select the 3 walls and press E for extrude and Z to move them up. Then I will select the edges again and press Ctrl B to bevel them. Scroll your mouse wheel to make them round. And if you tap out into object mode again, you can right click and shade smooth. So we have a smooth Lightroom that bounces off the light pretty nicely. Then for the light setup itself, we have some interesting lights. By the way, I will always put a total shot or a total setup in one collection. So I have all the 3 different shots in the same Blender file, but I can just toggle them on and off, which helps you reduce time switching between files. Now for the lights, we have first of all a simple like area light over here. Just that lights up the model a little bit. It's not going directly onto the model. It just gives the whole thing some light so that we can actually see the object itself. Then we have one light, which is the rim light. Why is it called rim light? Because if we go into our camera, we can see we have a rim light on the object. This one right here, this white line, which just lights up your object from the back. If I turn this off, you can see we have no highlights on the object. If I turn this on, there is some highlights on there. And one other light is also there at exactly the same position, but turned 100 degrees into the other side. So it lights up also the background. So we have a little bit more light in the whole scene. And now, of course, the main light, this one right here, which will light up your object perfectly and gives also some shadows to the ground. And to make it even more interesting for this short animation, I parented the light to an empty and I rotated the empty around the object. So you can see the shadow starts moving a bit, and we also have some more interesting light variations. Always in product renders, you should do something with the light, so it's not static, it's not super boring. And if you just turn the light a little bit from left to right, we can see we have some interesting shadow going on the floor, and it just looks much nicer. If you want to parent a light to an empty, just select the light, shift select the empty and press Ctrl P. This will set up the parent and choose object keep transformation. And now if you rotate the empty, the light also rotates with the empty, and you can animate the empty now so it rotates around your object. It's super simple and quick setup, but it's quite effective for a simple shot like this. Now, last but not least, the camera setup for the hero shot. Just make sure it's right in the center. And if we go into the camera settings, we can go into the viewport display, open the composition guide, and activate the cerate, which will help you with those cerate lines. And this just helps you guide the camera. I also use a wider focal length, so it just like kind of zooms into the object a bit more, which also helps you showing the object more properly, because if you have a super small focal length, something like, I don't know, something like 20 or so, you have this fisheye lens, which doesn't look good for product shots. So usually just go quite far, about 90 or even 100 millimeters, so your product is centered in the middle. I think other than that, I didn't do much for the camera. It's also quite helpful for a shot like this that not too many things are moving. So if the camera would move in your scene, just make sure it's super tiny movement, just a few meters, centimeters from left to right. So you don't have too much distraction and you can focus on your main object. That's maybe quite specific for my scene right now, but how I created this wiggle effect or this swaying effect from left to right. Again, I parented the cushion and this outer frame onto an empty at the top right here and keyframed the empty. And in the graph editor right here, I selected the Y rotation, so the rotation going left to right. And under modifiers, I added in the built-in function. So you can just click on the add modifier, select the built-in function, and this will activate this sine function right here. So as you can see, the sine function in my case creates this left to right swinging movement, which is super helpful for this, so I don't have to animate it manually. And it also looks better if I would have set this up manually with keyframes. All right, let's go to the second shot. Usually I just copy and paste the whole collection from the first shot, and then we'll go into the second shot right here. And in the second shot, the first thing I usually do is move the camera to a different location where I want it to have. And in that case, it's a classic close-up shot. Now for the close-up shot, I think I left the lights usually at the same positions. I think I moved the key lights, this one right here, a little bit closer to the object so it's lit up a little bit better. And of course I added in a gobo light to create this nice line. Again, as I said before, for product renders, try to work with lights and try to create interesting light setups that guide your line where you want the focus of your objects to be. I also moved the lights from left to right a little bit to create this nice looking effect. I also didn't overdo it, just a small movement from left to right so the user can still focus on the object. To emphasize even better the close-up shot and where the user should focus on, in the camera tab I activated the depths of field. And if you also activate the limits, this one right here, you can see if I move this closer or further away, we have this crosshair right here, which guides you where the focal point is at the exact moment. So right now the focal point is in the cushion right here. And as you can see in the beginning of the shot, the focal point is more at the back end. And then the shot proceeds and the focal point gets closer and closer to the front and then stays there for also another second. So the user can see all the details in the foreground. This just creates an interesting look, so we can focus on the back side of your object and then more on the front of the object. It just, again, creates a more interesting look and feel. Usually for the gobo light, I use my own gobo add-on. You can get this on my Gumroad, and if you don't have this, you can simply set it up on your own. Just create a spotlight. Let's move it up like this, and let's increase the power a little bit. And then in the Nodes tab, click Use Nodes and go into the Graph Editor. In the Shader Editor. And let's add in an image texture. And for the image texture, you usually take a gobo texture. Those are just black and white textures that create interesting light setups. You would also get all these gobo textures in my add-on. But for the simple line, you could also create this in Photoshop. Simply just create a straight white line on a black background. Select it and connect this to your color input. And as you can see, we already have this nice setup right here. You could also increase the radius a little bit so it blurs out on the sides, which creates a more realistic and nicer effect. And with that, you just hover over your object. At this point in the creation, I also realized that all my lights were super white. So I also lowered the temperature a little bit to give it this warmer light. And for me, it looked way nicer. This is just a personal preference because usually I feel like most modern shots are just too white and black. So depending on the object or the product you have, you could dial in some colors for the lights just a tiny bit so you have some accents. All right, last but not least, it's this shot right here. And to be honest, this was a super fun shot to create. And with this shot, I wanted to show you that 3D is not your only medium that you can use for creating a product render. Most of the time, people are not just interested in your object or the product, but also maybe the name, how much it costs, and some keywords that user know more about your object. And that's why you can create a shot where the object moves kinda out of the way of the middle of your frame. Make space for text, illustrations, logos, whatever the company or the project needs. And to create this scene, I think I just used the setup from the first shot, but I placed my camera more straight onto the object. So we have a more front-facing camera onto the object, and then move the object out of the way. Again, you can do this by simply selecting all the parts of your object and parent it to an empty, and then animate the empty. And I give you also a little trick right here. If we go into the graph editor, and let's look at the X location. So this is the movement from left to right. You just simply add 2 keyframes from this position to this position. And so that it doesn't just look boring from left to right and has this more like swoosh animation. So it's slow, then fast and slow again. We can use the graph editor for this. So select the location you want to target, right click and choose hide unselected curves. So we can only focus on this curve right here. And if you press Control and click the middle mouse button, you can kind of transform it to a setup like this. So we have more control and see better what's going on in the graph. Usually the graph would look something like this, just a basic S-shape curve, but this can get super boring. And what we want is a quite steep fall off. So it's a slow motion. This straight line means it's slow. Steep line means the animation goes fast and then slow again in the end. And you can change this with the handles at the bottom right here. So try to move the handles more to the left for a steeper fall off right here. And same for the top right there. And with playing around with the shape, you can create a nice looking swoosh animation. Try to make a reverse S shape as well, but with a steep fall off to create a more dynamic animation. Again, for the wiggling right here, I used the sine curve again and also restricted it to some frames to have a blend in and blend out movement. So it swings faster when it moves fast, and then it starts to fade out again. So the movement gets slower, and this creates this nice looking wiggle effect right here. And with that, I don't mean you have to do it with your product the exact same. But for me, what helped me improve the most and understand the concept of a product animation a bit better is you should have a main movement and a secondary movement. And the main movement right now is the whole object moves from the middle to the left side, and the secondary movement is the little wiggle. So keep in mind, if your object has multiple parts in it, try to move the whole object into a place and maybe add a secondary movement. I know it's quite hard because no object looks exactly like this, but maybe let's say you have a keyboard, so you move the whole keyboard, and secondary movement could be some keys getting pressed or something like this. Or get creative with it and add also some abstract objects into here so the eye doesn't get boring but also not distracted from your main object. And with that, you would already have 3 nice and clean product shots that you could use for showcase or even for client work. Just one more tip I want to give you on the way. If you have an object that doesn't have good textures, first of all, make sure the textures are high quality, because in the end, this is the most important part to show the product in its best state. And if you just have low quality textures, it could look super gamey, and most people don't want that. Alright, if you want to see more product shots ideas, maybe with a different product or just some more movement or some cooler effects, just write a comment, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Peace out and happy creating.